your community is either going to be helping you keep members, helping you get new members, helping you get content, or helping you get research. Those are kind of like the four buckets that things are going to fall into. And obviously, there's a lot of, you can probably immediately start to think of some holes. Anytime you put a framework on, you're like, oh, there's some stuff missing from that. So that's true. But that's kind of how I think about the kind of large buckets of impact that communities can have. And
keep your members at the heart of the decision making. Build your community with people, not for them. And I think oftentimes, not oftentimes, that's a superlative. I think at times businesses and some community builders assume what the community wants. And I treat my community as a product. Just ask them, what is it that you're looking for?
Today's event is something very, very close to my heart because the topic is so fascinating for me. So today we are going to talk about how to design community use cases for better business impact. So just breaking it down for you, when I say community use cases, every platform, when you're building, there is something that a community can enable for you. And whether it is on the platform, off the platform, we want to understand what are these use cases. And then we also want to understand how can you tie in these use cases with business impact. So we want to cover what is a use case and, how do you design a use case. So that's a bit on, community architecture, product thinking, product design, those side of things. And then, ROI of community, to be mapped with all those use cases right from the get-go when you're thinking of starting a community use case or a community program, at your organization. So that's the goal of this event. And I couldn't have asked for a better speaker lineup. The panel that I have is super exciting. So I want to quickly start with inviting my first guest for the day, DeMario Bell. DeMario is one of the most empathetic community builders I've met, and he has held various roles in, higher education, which is even more special considering he's generation graduate. And currently he is a senior community manager at Culture where he leads a global HR community. And you can actually talk to him for everything related to community, HR, and higher ed. Welcome, DeMario. Super excited to have you here.
Thank you, Nipun. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Let me quickly have my second guest of the day as well. Would love to have Noele Flowers on the stage. Noele is what you can call the face of being multifaceted and talented. She's a community expert, content creator, singer, songwriter as well. She's led the design, like the community initiatives for, some of the big names of the industry. You would have heard of Teachable, Commsor. These are like really, core community sort of platforms which are built with community as the core of whatever they've done. So, I couldn't have asked for a better speaker, than Noele for this topic. And, if you're looking for consulting in your organization around anything community, Noele is the person you really need to speak to. So welcome, Noele. Good to have you here.
Thank you. What an incredibly kind intro. I'm really excited to be here and to speak with everybody today. Thanks for having me.
So Noele, DeMario, my first question to you today is, what are some of the community use cases that you've seen, that have driven business impact? Maybe we can start with Noele. Like I would love to go deep into Teachable and Commsor, but anything other than those which like you have seen, and I'm sure you would have observed hundreds of such examples, like what resonates the most with you in terms of a community use case that drove business impact?
Sure. So I guess that has been one of the things that's so fun about doing consulting and also working in roles where I'm working with a lot of entrepreneurs, which I did at both Teachable and Commsor, is getting to see lots of different use cases and business setups and how the community kind of fits into the business as a whole. But one thing I would say that made me excited about coming into this panel is really the emphasis on choosing the business impact first and then figuring out what your opportunities are from there. And when I'm kind of talking about this concept with my clients, or if I've been teaching a course on this, I'm often sort of breaking it down into like really simple nuts and bolts of your community is either going to be helping you keep members, helping you get new members, helping you get content, or helping you get research. Those are kind of like the four buckets that things are going to fall into. And obviously there's a lot of, you can probably immediately start to think of some holes. Anytime you put a framework on, you're like, oh, there's some stuff missing from that. So that's true. But that's kind of how I think about the kind of large buckets of impact that communities can have. And I think when you break it down like that, you'll start to see that every use case kind of falls into some of those categories. To be a little bit more specific, an example that I can give is when I was at Teachable, we were really geared toward retaining customers with the community. So if we were going in that direction, that one obvious thing that points us to in terms of what the setup of the community is, okay, the community is for customers. If we're here to retain customers, it's only for customers. It's not for everybody. So that's one like really big initial fundamental decision that comes from the business impact that we're going for. And I could really kind of yammer on for a while here. So I'll pause there and kind of let you redirect me or pitch this over to DeMario.
Yep. I'll have a couple of follow-up questions on that, but quickly, DeMario, what has been your, and I remember, you shared it in last week with me, but what has been your biggest ROI use case that you've seen with communities?
Yeah, I thank you, Nipun, and Noele. You set that up just so wonderfully. And I lead our global community here at Culture, which makes up over 100,000 HR practitioners and people leaders who believe in our mission of creating a better world of work. So you don't have to be a customer to be a part of our community. You can be a prospect, you can be a fan, and you can be a customer. Our goal here, Nipun, is to be the premier thought leader when you think about HR best practices in community. And so for us, 2023 was a big year for our community here at Culture Amp when we think about business impact. When I joined in 2022, when we think about revenue driven back to the business, the community team influenced about $500,000 in 2022 back to the business. In 2023, we were able to double that to $1.1 million. And so when you think about use cases, obviously we've provided value to those who are in our community. And as a result, they've wanted to learn more about who are we at Culture Amp and how can we support their work.
Wow. All I could hear in that is the numbers that you said, you've significantly increased the impact and you've measured the impact as well. $1.1 million is phenomenal. Like just having that number is phenomenal in my view. So I really feel this is something that we would love to double down on, both in the terms of how you're measuring it, but just holding on the thought. I think what is the use case and what I understood from whatever I saw about Culture Amp, what is the main use case I felt was knowledge exchange. But how do you think of different use cases that are there in Culture Amp?
Yeah, that's a great question. And forgive my the noise in the background. We're an advocacy and acquisition community here at Culture Amp. And so what that means is that our goals are really tied to building this movement of advocacy, these brand ambassadors who can go out into the market and evangelize for our brand. We know good things happen when the community comes together because they will evangelize for our brands in unimaginable ways. And so on the acquisition piece, in terms of business impact, our focus is on top of funnel growth. So how do we, as a result of driving more brand awareness, how does that lead to new business back to the community? Well, that's on the business end. But on the end user part, managing an HR community I found to be very, very interesting and such an honor to lead because HR teams are typically the people that everyone goes to for support. But who do HR teams go to for support? And so our community is a community of practice. It's where they come for knowledge exchange. It's where they come for support. And it's also where they come just to feel less alone. And I don't want to understate that piece of community where Nipun, we are living in a hybrid world. And yes, people want to come to a community for utility, but people stay for the unity. Once people are able to see value and get value, they want to come to form more connections, especially with a community of my scale. They have access to over 100,000 people, whereas they wouldn't have access to. So in our community, one of those main use cases are coming in for knowledge exchange. And what we've seen here in our community is that not only do our community members want to learn from each other, but they also want to know, like, what is CodeTramp doing? Well, what does CodeTramp think about that? So in our community, Nipun, we also share a lot of content as well to our community in terms of HR best practices and what's happening in the industry as well. That's just one specific use case, but that is a use case that we're measuring. So we're looking at how many discussions are happening in the community? What are some of those trending topics that are coming up in the community? Of those trending topics, how does that inform the content that we should be co-creating here at CodeTramp? How does that inform our product roadmap? Are we thinking about the right things? How does that inform the type of events that we host? So there are a number of things how we think about utilizing those discussions to inform what we do on the business end. We're also thinking about how many people are coming back to the community. One of the good problems that we have in our community is that it's all been organic growth. And so we have not poured any resources into acquisition, and we've been blessed to not have to worry about that. So for us, we think about, if we continue to drive value, how do we keep folks coming back? How do we keep members posting more, but new members posting as well? So that is a specific use case that we're measuring here in our community.
Got it. I think it's fantastic. Like knowledge exchange was pretty obvious to me, but what was very interesting was, because these HR professionals are solo professionals, right? In a way, in most companies, especially the small, medium companies, right? So they come here to feel less alone. That's phenomenal. The other thing which I could take away was not only it's peer-to-peer knowledge exchange, but they also come there to consume the knowledge that Culture Amp provides them in terms of the trends and some of the content that you offer. Awesome.
That is, yeah.
Awesome. Noel, and maybe because you mentioned teachable earlier, and probably retention was what you said as well. What were core 2 or 3 use cases that you were driving via community at Teachable, and how those sort of funnel into, let's say, retention or any other business metric?
Sure. Yeah. And what I like about the way that you're talking about use cases and kind of pushing us to point to some of these multiple specific things that can go on inside communities is that you're kind of pushing towards this idea that a lot of times communities function as a center of excellence. So it's maybe a little bit artificial for us to say, oh, the community's for this, the community's for that. Oftentimes it's sitting, I sometimes describe this as the hub of a wheel. And then the spokes are reaching out to all of these different departments. It looks like that resonates with DeMario, which makes sense with what you just described, that you're working on, some content that I imagine is then feeding into content marketing. You're working with some customers that I imagine is feeding into product decisions. You're working on support deflection. So there can be lots of different things that are happening under the kind of larger umbrella. But I think there are some kind of pairings that work better than others. So for example, in the situation that I described with Teachable, where we're focused on our existing customers and we're focused on driving retention and kind of reducing churn for that group of people, that really lends itself well to, say, a super user ambassador program where you might be focused on the top 10% of users, or it really lends itself well to product advisory boards that are focused on the most engaged users helping make decisions about product, and it lends itself well to case studies that might enable sales. On the flip side, I really was thinking a lot about my time at Commsor while DeMario was talking, because there's that other kind of large business setup of creating a community that is intended to make you a knowledge leader in the space that you operate within, and also sometimes to like create the category that you're operating within, that you're actually trying to define what the space is that your community sits in. And when I was working at Commsor, that was the setup, right? We were working with community managers, and we were trying to be kind of a central voice and thought leader and trusted voice within that space that would allow us to kind of tap into all of the different things that that persona might want as a service, whether that's software or education or whatever it might be. So, but again, I think my like big point or keyword is like starting from the business impact, then kind of stemming out to some of the use cases, and then stemming out to what does the programming look like, which I think for a lot of my clients or people that come and talk to me, they're kind of doing the opposite by accident, where they're coming to me and saying, oh, I want to start a community where people can come do events, and then that's going to happen twice a week, and the events are going to be about such and such topic. And then it's a lot harder to kind of reverse engineer that back into something that's going to be impactful for your business, versus starting from, I'm trying to create a membership subscription, and like these are the values that I need to kind of justify that use case. So like starting from that impact is what I would emphasize. I've gone on a lot of directions here though.
No, I think it's helpful. What I'm really looking to find is, when, let's say if your if your company is fairly big, you can invest into like doing n number of programs, right? But if your company is, let's say, mid-sized, you want to start with one or two problems that you're solving for your customers, right? Like for your members when you're building a community. So I'll give you an example from my own experience. When we built that community platform for doctors, we started with it being a generic discussion forum for them, and there were a few other things, but we really went deep into analyzing what are the kind of conversations they were having in those forums. We narrowed it down to knowledge exchange, but even in knowledge exchange, we narrowed down the use case to case discussions, right? So we positioned the platform as a case discussion platform for doctors. Now, there were a lot of things that went into it, but narrowing down that primary thing that your users are coming for, and there could be a lot of ancillary things that they will also see from the platform. But what is that one positioning in terms of the output that I'm getting from the community? I think that establishing that positioning helps a lot. So what I would love to hear, and maybe the answer is there is not one thing, but these two things. Is there anything like specific that you can probably, Noel, this is a follow-up question for you. Anything that you can bring from any of your customers, or let's say any of your past experiences, where let's say this one specific use case really drove whatever engagement, retention, product ideas, whatever that business impact is.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if I would always say that it's one specific thing, although I love like the example of getting people to talk about one really kind of dialed in topic. But the way that I talk about this with my clients is trying to define actually like 3 to 4 content pillars that are going to be sort of like the top level things that they discuss around whatever your goal is. So what that might look like is, I'll give you sort of an abstract example so I'm not blowing up any of my specific clients, but like say that you are a personal trainer and you are creating a community where you're going to send your personal training plans to all of your clients, and they're going to talk to each other about their experience with your plans, right? There are so many different things underneath that kind of like large idea that people might want to talk about. And what I see my clients doing a lot of times is sort of outlining that in the architecture. So you'll like go into the community and you'll see that they've done, weightlifting, Pilates, blah, blah, blah. So there's like all of these different topics that are being outlined within the space. And oftentimes what I'm trying to get them to do is, okay, go back to your goal. What are you trying to get people to do? Are you trying to get them to book more one-on-one personal training sessions with you? Are you trying to get them to talk to you less because you've reached a capacity and you want them to talk to each other more so that you can kind of like spread out and get subscription on that? And then taking from those top level goals, okay, given that, what are like the 3 or 4 macro categories that they would discuss or do within this space that would kind of ladder up to those goals? And oftentimes a good way to get into this that I'll have my clients do is a mock feed exercise. So I'll actually like have them create say you log into your community tomorrow, what is like your ideal scenario? And I'm silly, so I have them like make up names and stuff too. But okay, this person's going to say this. Then someone else is going to respond this. The next post is going to look like this. So that you can kind of start to think through, what do I want this to look like? And therefore, what am I prompting people to do? What am I teaching them to do within this space? That's kind of go back to my goals.
Interesting. I think that's a very interesting framework where you're visualizing in that depth on what people are talking about even before the launching happens. So
yeah,
phenomenal.
We don't realize people come into communities and sometimes they talk about things that we like don't want them to talk about, right? Like sometimes it feels like a bummer if you've created this whole space that is this big community of practice, and then everything that people are talking about is like, I can't log into my account, or, you know, such and such is broken, or they're talking about like, I want to buy such and such thing, and it feels much more transactional than you want it to. So I think sometimes visualizing what you want them to do is really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. DeMario, my next question is to you, and I want to shift the gears a little bit. I want to understand, let's say, you're starting a community, at your org today, like anyone, let's say in the audience, and they have these broad thoughts that, like A, B, C, D, these are some of the use cases that might make sense for my community. How do you like go about finding like what are these like use cases, and then how do you go deep into where do you double down on? Like what happened when you started Culture Amp? Maybe, from that experience, you can take us through this example.
Yeah, so that's a big question. So I'm going to try to hit that very quickly. So when I joined Culture Amp, I actually didn't build this community. The community had already organically grown to what it is. When I joined Culture Amp, really from an admin standpoint, what my responsibility was to come in and to 10x what was already done, and to think about how to build a team for scale and efficiency. So on that end, we were more focused on like, how do we tie the community back to closer to the business? And so for us as a business, we were really focused on like doubling down on customer love. So how do we drive, increase, long time or lifetime value? However, in a previous role, I want to give you an example. At a former role, I was the head of community and I built out our customer community. And so when you talk about use case, because it's a very particular question, that use case is really focused on product adoption and customer retention. And so our community was really focused on how do we provide resources, knowledge exchange, customer education in our community that will get our customers taking more action back into the platform. Because we know that customers who are using your platform more are twice as likely to renew. If they're getting more value from your platform, let me clarify, they're twice as more likely to renew. So that use case for our community is very specific, focused on product adoption, getting more users in the platform, and as a result of getting them in the platform, does that have an impact on expansion and retention? It's different here at Culture Amp, and I don't want to get into the weeds of that, but one of the things that Noele mentioned is that it's difficult to reverse engineer a community when you haven't identified what your priorities are, what your North Star is, or what you're trying to aim for. So without sharing too much, here at Culture, while we have this global community, we're also going through this change management as well. Thinking about like, what does the next evolution of our community look like? So I want to zoom out, Nipun, and say that we're actually thinking about at a more strategic level, what does our community look like in 2028? What do our community members want? What are they looking for? So those are some of the conversations that we're having now. It didn't directly answer your question, but I hope the first part did when you talk about like, what's that process like? And I will add to that, when I was developing my community at my former organization, I was focused on customer success. It was a lot of meetings, and Noele can speak to that. It's a lot of conversations with a lot of people across the business because people are very protective over their area. Product is thinking about, what does this mean? More, tickets to product support for us. Customer success is thinking about, well, I don't want you talking. I don't want no one else talking to my customers. So it's a lot of assuaging feelings. It's a lot of playing nice. And then you get into the tactical work in terms of, this is what this is going to look like. So you're pretty much architecting what this is going to look like, and then assigning to the rest of the business, this is what I would like your role to look like, and setting KPIs and targets. All the unpretty things that a community manager don't want to really do, but you have to do in order to make it work. So,
yeah, I agree. When you're thinking of a use case, or when you're starting a community, the most powerful thing to do is to really chat one-on-one, get on one-on-one meetings. I think they are the best. Noele, anything you want to add on that?
All I can think while I'm listening to DeMario chat is I wish we were coworkers. You're completely awesome and have such a handle on all of these different sides of things.
Cool.
Plus one.
Awesome. Now, moving on to my next set of questions. We've talked about how do you identify these use cases. We've talked about a bit about the business impact. I want to talk about the whole process of identifying these use cases, pre-launch versus post-launch. When you're pre-launch, you really don't have a lot of data, to sort of analyze and go back to and think from what has happened. Whereas post-launch, you have that luxury. How do things change, in both the cases, in your experience in really driving the, I go back to the same thing, driving the business impact and identifying the next thing that you need to do to create that impact in your community. Pre-launch and post-launch, what changes, and have you seen anything different? Noele, you want to start?
Sure. I think the bottom line is like, ideally it wouldn't change if you have nailed down the impact and kind of done your research. I think like that's kind of the game, is you're trying to create a strategy before you launch that as accurately as possible predicts what the launch and the next state looks like. And so for me, that often looks like doing more research than you think is necessary. And sometimes a level of research that when I tell my clients to do it, they're like, I could not possibly spend that amount of time and I do not want to. Yeah, so I think that said, like, obviously you don't get things perfectly every single time. So I think the way to de-risk that is just to do things one at a time. So not launching a program that is actually completely comprehensive, but instead you might have your eye toward, I'm going to launch like 1 or 2 initiatives this quarter, and then I'm going to do another 2 the next quarter. And also oftentimes not communicating your initiatives as like, this is the be all end all. So a lot of times it's in the rollout to keep your members' trust as you pivot and change over time. So that could look like, instead of launching a course program that is going to be the foundation of the entire community, we're running a challenge over the next 6 weeks, right? So like, it's going to end. They know it's going to end. They don't have to know whether you are actually wanting to do that forever and what you're measuring to see whether it survives or not. But yeah, does that answer your question or kind of get us?
Yeah. I think what I could gather was, while you should do as much as resource like you have in terms of researching before launching, but if you have limited resource, start with one or two programs, see their impact. If you've done your research well, most likely the impact will be there. But if not, be ready to pivot. But when you're pivoting, keep your members trust along while doing that. DeMario, you want to add anything to that?
I do want to add to that. I would say, and any community builder would agree with this, keep your members at the heart of the decision making. Build your community with people, not for them. And I think not oftentimes, that's a superlative. I think at times businesses and some community builders assume what the community wants. And I treat my community as a product. Just ask them, what is it that you're looking for? And I tell people, only survey as much as you can take action. Because people don't get survey fatigue, they get inaction fatigue. So if you go to your community and you survey them and ask for feedback and they hear nothing, they're going to be like, well, what did you ask me for? So make them feel like an integral part of the community, which leads me into ambassador programs. Ambassador programs are a very specific use case for a community, especially one like ours when we think about brand awareness. But community ambassadors are really great advisors. They're great evangelists. They, think about 10xing, and they're also great super users. And that's one specific use case that I tell people, if you're going to do something well right off the bat, develop an ambassador program. Who are those super users, those early adopters? Who's going to ride with you? Who's going to help you build this community, not around you, but around them? Because ideally, you want a community that's going to endure way after you leave anyway. So.
Awesome. I think, definitely, we've already sort of put it in chat, but if someone is not looking at chat, this was a big takeaway for all of us. Only survey people, on the amount of action that you can take. So fantastic nugget of gold. Moving on, we've sort of identified the use cases. We've done some analysis on, pre-launch, post-launch, how to pivot the use cases. But let's say we've sort of established some level of use case and some level of engagement is coming on it. Now, how do you sort of drive the community behavior towards the intended use case? Let's say if you want to do, if you launch the community with the thought of hey, this will be a community where people will exchange knowledge with each other, but something else is happening. How do you take that into account? DeMario, you want to start on that side?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love that question, Nipun. And I'm going to hit that two different ways. I think on the first end, we all know that we can't, control human behavior. And at the end of the day, a community program is different than other programs because typically with other programs, we're trying to manipulate and control things, but with community, it's differently. What we can do, to your question, is influence behavior. So how do we get members to leverage our community in which it was designed and intended? And the simple answer to that is, for me, it's been our guidelines. Our community guidelines has been that resource that really lays out, this is what our community is for. This is how you can leverage our community. This is how you can get the most of it. When I began to see action in our community, Nipun, that is not why the community was designed, I approach it in one of several ways. I look at it and say, hey, is this an emerging theme? Is this something that I should keep my eye on? Or if it's completely off the bat, then it's just maybe this isn't the right community for this individual. So let me have a one-on-one check-in to better learn what is it that they're looking for. And if our community is not right for them, I typically guide them to a new community. A perfect example, I run an HR community, and that's someone who joined our community who is a software developer. And now, mind you, our community is open to anyone who believes a better world of work is possible. And that's not only HR folks. but someone, this person was a software developer and they wanted to connect with people who write code. Well, I don't know too many HR people who spend their time focusing on code. Maybe those who are analyzing survey data. And I, after, doing that one-on-one consultation, I said, I really think this other community that my friend runs will really, really be a great community for you. So all that to say, you know, I tell people having community guidelines are really important because they really set the tone for in terms of the behavior that you want to see modeled in the community and what you don't want to model. And then don't be immediately alarmed by new behavior that you see. That could be an emerging trend, or it could be where you have to check in a little bit deeper to learn something new. I will also say this is hard to do, but I used to say this when I worked in alumni relations at a university. When you're building something for a particular audience, then it has to be the right 40 people. It just can't be 40 people because community is not just throwing people in a space and saying, okay, go half at it. It has to be more intentional than that. And then you as the community builder have to model the behavior that you want to see in your community as well.
Yeah. Building on that, when you say model the behavior, that sort of takes me obviously to, this practice called seeding. So Noele, what's your thought on seeding?
Yeah, so I'm realizing also why I am absolutely loving and vibing with everything that DeMario is saying, because we both have a background in education. So I used to be a classroom teacher too. So I want to kind of key in on and underline one of the words that DeMario said, which is modeling. A lot of times, if I'm in a community setting, like one way to think about it is that you are like a classroom teacher or like a facilitator within the space. And they're not going to just kind of spontaneously start doing the things that you want them to do within the space most of the time. Sometimes you get really lucky, but and so what you're doing is showing them this is what it looks like to have a conversation here in this space. This is what we talk about here. This is how we talk about it here. These are some of the norms of what we do within this space. And a lot of that looks like proactive engagement. So for a lot of folks, they may be kind of coming in like, well, how am I supposed to form what people are saying? Well, you have to do some speaking and some kind of engaging within the space yourself to show them what is done here. And sometimes that might look like asking a question within the space to start the conversation that you want to have happen, especially in the beginning. But one thing that I tell people to help them sort of thread the needle between that kind of seeding engagement versus dominating the conversation is don't go in there and act like a completely random different person within the community space. Go in there and act like a really good member. So generally, I don't want to do stuff within my community that I would not want to see a member doing. There are some exceptions here. Like sometimes you're going to be coming in with an announcement or some kind of like private information, or you have a sort of special role, and that's not bad. But what you're doing is coming in and starting a conversation that feels authentic. So sometimes that means like you're doing some storytelling from your own life and like why you're interested in the topic. So that's sort of the difference between why some community managers come into a space and the way they're engaging might feel like really wooden or strange, is that they're like, hello, community. I am your leader, and this is like the link that I want to share with you today, which is really not how a community member would speak. So trying to embody that super user perspective. And I'll say one more thing on this, just a term that we used a lot in classroom teaching that I found really helpful and I still find helpful is the idea of scaffolding. So the idea that you are starting with a lot of support and then sort of gradually pulling back the support or the training wheels as you go. So to give an example, if I want somebody to build the behavior of starting a deep conversation around a practice, that might start with me actually starting the conversation for them. Then I might directly ask them to start the conversation and outline what I want them to do. Then I might give them some feedback when they spontaneously start the conversation or kind of go into the space and help them mold the conversation. And then you're kind of receding the training wheels as you go. So thinking about ratcheting up their level of independence as you go.
Sure. Cool, awesome. That's a lot of interesting thoughts, and I like the way you went really technical with being a teacher. Like that's a very very sort of interesting mindset. Which is hard to do if you're not an educator before you're a community builder. But my sort of takeaway is treat them as students and model that behavior. So that's a dual responsibility in a way. You're student as well as teacher when you are sort of doing this. uh, cool, awesome. Moving to the next question, which is, I think we've sort of, and I would love to get to DeMario on that $1.1 million number. How do you measure the impact of a community use case? And because of that, maybe DeMario, I'd love to start from you. How do you measure these numbers today?
Yeah. I hope that Coach Rep doesn't get upset with me for sharing too much. But no, that's a great question. And I will say, Nipun, I'm really proud of what my team has been able to do. But it's more than just my team. That win extends to our members as well. This year, we also won Best Growth Marketing Community by CMX for 2024, and that number had a big part of that. So when you talk about how do we measure it, there are several parts, and how I'm going to answer that question. On the technical part, on the tools and systems, we were very intentional here at Culturam to minimize our tech stack and centralize that into a solid platform that would give us a 360 view of all of our community spaces. And so all of our tech tools here at Culturam communicate with one another. So they're integrating with one another, and we're very intentional about that. Because when you ask about how do we measure, and from community, specifically, how do we measure ROI? How do we measure impact? You need your tools to be able to have capture points set up. And when we talk about capture points, you want to be able to know, like, what are your users clicking on? So we typically get that in the forms of cookies or forms that they might fill out for us as well. So when we talk about what does that $1.1 million mean, what that means is anyone who has clicked on any content in our community. So if you clicked on content, we have a UTM tracker set up. And so what that does is that shoots information back to our systems. If you have liked any content that you've engaged with, and you say, I want to book a demo with Culturam, that's attributed back to the community team because you took action on something that happened in the community. Now, with attribution, we share attribution with other folks. So we're just one capture point. The other piece is referrals. If someone introduces someone, from our community. So to be concise, it is content that we share. If you click on our content and you like it, you book a demo, that gets attributed back to community. Referrals. If someone books a referral and they refer and they say you are the reason why, or community is the reason why, that gets attributed back to community as well. So a big piece, for what that 1.1 means. And then events. I don't want to forget that as well. Events as well. So we host community events as well. So anytime you register for one of our events, that data gets pushed back to our sales force. So if you are a prospect and we are currently trying to nurture that relationship, we would get a part of that attribution. But if you are not a contact in our record, that would create a new record for you, and then that'll put you into a nurture campaign here at Culturam. So that's the really tactical part of, like, what does that represent?
Nice. This reminds me of something that I've read called CQL, which is like a community qualified lead.
Yeah.
We at LikeMinds, we also have started doing that. So we try to see, like, for example, everyone who is coming to the event, and is there a way we can start a dialogue with them, or let's say if they are engaging on the content that we're sharing, is there a way to start a dialogue with them? So these are like people who are more brand exposed than, let's say, people who are not. So definitely what you said resonated with me on that. Noel, anything you want to add on top of it?
Yeah, I think I just I resonate a lot with the way that you're talking about this too, DeMario, because a lot of times the people want to talk about these forms of measurement because we want to be able to reproduce these outcomes within our communities. And there's a lot of conversations within the community space about how do you measure? What are the benchmarks for this? And I just want to kind of add a little word of caution to that, that oftentimes when it comes to reproducing other people's outcomes, measurement is so specific and personal to the business setup itself and the actual tools that you have to measure within that space. So I just want to encourage people to be creative and unique in the ways that they measure. So a good way to kind of get into this is starting with what are some of my problems or the outcomes that I want to produce, and what are some of the tools that I have. If you work at an organization, a good shortcut for this might be listening out for some of the things that are spoken about within an all hands presentation. So are they talking a lot about referrals? Are they talking a lot about ticket deflection? Some of those things that are most prized to the business, and then figuring out how's that already being measured today, and what's a way that I can kind of hook my wagon into that to demonstrate the impact that community has on this. So DeMario is talking about attribution. Those are existing forms of measurement that exist within the business already. The business already cares about and is bought in on the sense of when somebody comes in from this content source, we consider that to be X number of dollars. That's not something that the community department is necessarily making up. And I think that's important to making sure that the form of measurement that you choose feels relevant to your executives, is choosing something that they already understand the form of measurement, and you're just kind of showing what the connection is to community. And a lot of times the way that that shows up in a different use case might be just through cohort comparison. So if you're looking at, say, a metric like churn reduction, you might be looking at all of the people in the community. How are they performing on that metric versus those that are not in the community? So just comparing apples to apples on one specific thing, what I see a lot of community builders doing that kind of gets them in a rut here is trying to train executives on community specific metrics. So trying to say, oh, the community is really working. Look, we have this number of monthly active users, and executives, they don't get it, they don't want to get it, and they don't care, right? So they want you to communicate it to them in a way that is already related to stuff that they're tracking and that's already in their dashboard.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting where you go into that lens of, instead of thinking of new ways, find existing ways where people are already looking at metrics which they care about, and think about how can you add into those metrics. My follow-up to that, Noel, is I think you touched upon that, but is there a science of communicating the impact? One way is, of course, you have the number, which I think DeMario has mastered. But let's say if you don't have a revenue number attributed, is there a science of communicating it to the budget authorities?
Yeah, so if you're in a position that you don't have the tools that DeMario has in this case, or that I had at Teachable to do a churn comparison, which is honestly, that I'll just be honest, that met number took me probably 2 years to get, right? It's time to put that data request in and to build the right dashboards and to make sure that the tools that you're using are passing the right pieces of information. So, but you still have to advocate for your program in the meantime while you don't have those things.
Exactly.
And I think there's two, actually maybe a few different ways to do that that just have to do with highlighting how you are servicing existing teams. So an example of this might be, I can really easily count the number of case studies or content pieces that are coming out of a community if I have formed my community around content creation, and I have some kind of formalized way for members to contribute to content or become speakers in something. And oftentimes there's already a form of measurement for that, right? There's some kind of lead generation that's associated with the blog post. So I could speak on that. I could say, we sourced 10 blog posts from this quarter from the community or got quotes or whatever it is. And those are responsible for X amount of lead generation, which translates to this amount of money. Another kind of example that's sort of a similar setup of trying to like attribute dollars and cents to things that you're like literally counting might be user interviews. So oftentimes that's a big problem for product teams, is that they're looking for who can I actually speak to. And there is often a real dollar amount associated with that for them to incentivize the person to come in. People pay for user interviews. You can also look at like the amount of time that the product manager spent on it and kind of extrapolate from there. So that's what I would recommend, is just looking at what are some of the outputs that are relevant to other teams that are already valued that I can connect to.
Sure. DeMario, anything other than the revenue number that you communicate internally or you've seen others communicate internally?
Yeah, Noelle is just, I'm taking so many notes. So I want to say this really quickly just for time, is to Noelle's point, really the purpose of community is to help other teams scale their work. And so I'm not always trying to do net new things, because net new things just become activity. And when you are a small shop, which a number of community teams are, unless you are a Salesforce, a Square, or one of those bigger companies, then you can divide and conquer. But it's typically like, if customer success is focused on churn reduction, it's just like, okay, let me support you in that. And so you all are sharing that. The other piece I would say when you talk about reporting out on numbers is something that we're starting to do here at CodeTramp is do an internal roadshow. Keep community top of mind for everyone. You can never talk enough about community if you are a community-led organization, which you should be, because community is the future. So we, as much as we can, we're going back to the business to say, this is how we're helping the business get closer to our goals. And let me say this. Don't always be hyper-focused on what the business needs, because the role of a community manager is to balance the business priorities and what the community needs as well. And that's a fine line to dance at times. And so I see some community managers who do either or well. And I think what makes a very successful community manager is someone who does have that commercial acumen and someone who understands the heartbeat of a community member, who understands what they need. And so that is really important. And I would leave you all with this, Nipun, is say, know your numbers. So when my team comes back to me and say, well, what does that $1.1 million really mean? I said, well, let me show you happily. Let me walk you through that. So know your numbers. And if you don't know your numbers, let me tell you this, you better befriend someone who's on your data analytics team. And so I'm so serious, because when you need a favor, you got to be able to go back to them and say, hey, I need you to run this list of all these community members who've taken X action. Tell me what this means. So you don't have to go it alone. If you want to go fast, then go it alone. But if you want to go far, you better have some people on your team. So
that's awesome. I think what I'm hearing is a lot of tweet. It's like a tweet storm that you're sort of sharing. Awesome, DeMario. My next question, and this is the last question for the day from my side, is how do you see the role of technology in enabling any use case? And I know like we've talked about analytics a lot. So I would love to hear something other than analytics. So any of you wants to start first on that? Cool. Noele, you want to go first on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, all I would say is, like, again, kind of harkening back to our theme, we're starting with the goals and then we're making all the foundational decisions based off of the goals. So if you've started off with an understanding of what kind of business impact you want, that goes into your technology selection process as well. So there are going to be some kind of columns on your technology comparison spreadsheet that speak to that, right? I want to be able to enable people to create, because my entire use case is about lead generation through content marketing. Well, then the platform that I choose had better have really, really good high quality content creation and programming skills. If I want to do ticket deflection, that's my number one North Star metric, then I better choose something that has an integration to my ticketing customer support system and that allows me to track that. So just looking at some of those things as you select.
Got it. DeMario, any final thoughts on this?
I have one final thought, and I love Marissa's question actually, because that's timely for me. I would say the one thing that I'm following actually, Nipun and Noele, is AI and how AI is going to help me tell a better story when we think about some of that raw data to help me understand like what does this really mean, but also managing an online community. I'm very curious to see how that's going to help with like moderation, because when I think about the amount of time I spend in the community, with moderation, it's about 50% in the community, 50% in meetings. So I'm very curious from that in that role. I think we're all following AI to better understand like how it's going to enable us to do some of our best work. So I'm just going to leave you with that very simple response.
Cool. I think we've sort of overshot, than the stipulated time. Thank you so much, both of you, Noele, DeMario. Lot of insights, lot of tweets, lot of great content, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It was lovely to have such a good sort of topic, sort of served by even better sort of conversation we did today. So thank you so much again, DeMario, Noele. Everyone, both of them are active on LinkedIn. They've already shared. If you need to like really get some of your problems solved, don't shy away in reaching them out. They are sort of people who are in this together. Like community building is also a very tough profession. So a lot of people feel scared on whether this will happen or not. And trust me, if you reach out to people who have done it with specific problems, more often than not, they'll reply. And I can guarantee that Noele and DeMario are those people. So do reach out, feel free to reach out to me, Divya, would love to chat, anything that you need, always there for the ecosystem. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Noele. Thanks, DeMario.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
All right. Bye.